Now, is Trump breaking up with Europe? A national strategy plan released by the Trump administration earlier this week, or over last weekend really, described Europe as weak and questioned whether the continent had a strong enough defence and economy to be an ally of the US. The document said Europe risks civilizational erasure because of immigration and progressive social policies in Europe. Now, between tariffs, lawsuits against American tech giants, and Trump's push to halt the war in Ukraine on Russia's terms, the rift between the EU and the US has been growing. Now, you saw this coming.
Absolutely. I think it should have been obvious to anybody who was paying attention that Trump 2.0 was a very different beast to the first Trump administration. From early in the year, I think it was obvious that the hostility to Europe was going to have real material effects. And what it means now, I think, Pat, is that we've reached this really pivotal moment. The alliance between the United States and Europe goes back at least to World War I and World War II, but formally to the foundation of NATO in 1949. What the Americans have signaled, I think, not just in the US National Security Strategy published last Friday, but in comment after comment from Trump and from Pete Hegseth, his Secretary of State for War, and others, is that the alliance is effectively over. I don't think there's anybody in Europe left who believes that the United States would come to the rescue of one of the Baltic states, for example, if they were to be attacked by Russia. So
you're talking about Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which insists that if you attack one, you attack all, and therefore all respond.
Exactly. And of course, the irony here is that the only time Article 5 has been triggered is by the United States at the request of the United States after the attacks on 9/11. But I think the more important thing here is the geopolitical change that is happening. The United States, unbelievably for some, has pivoted so much that it is now a firm ally of the authoritarian powers, Russia and China. Trump makes his admiration for Putin and Xi no secret, and I suspect that poor Ronald Reagan is doing somersaults in his grave in Simi, California, because the evil empire that he did so much to fight in the 1980s is now the firm ally of Washington. And that's extraordinary, I think, for anybody who might have been expecting the second Trump administration. You know, it might be incompetent and ineffective, but I think they learned a huge amount from those first 4 years. And now we're in a position, I think, where the scales have fallen from the eyes of European leaders, and they're in a completely different position now.
Okay, but so far it looked like it was appeasement all the way by European leaders. And if you look at the welcome that Trump got at Windsor Castle with all the horses and all the palaver, I mean, and he enjoyed it, he revelled in it. I mean, that was a waste of time, basically. They were trying to flatter him. And, you know, he doesn't pay any attention. And when it comes, say, to the World Cup, if there are teams coming and fans coming from countries he doesn't like, he won't care about the so-called FIFA Peace Prize. Eaten bread is always instantly forgotten by Trump.
Of course. And those European leaders who invested a huge amount in so-called Trump whispering, the notion that they could go to Washington, have a word in his ear and talk him round, I think they've all been proven completely wrong. But you mentioned what happened in London in September. I think the critical moment for Europe was actually the meeting at Trump's golf course in Scotland, because what happened there was that the Europeans caved into his extortion. They agreed to a completely disproportionate tariff regime so that American goods to Europe would come in tariff-free, but on the other side, European goods to the United States would be subject to a 15% tariff.
Why do you think they gave into that? Was it simply, you know, stupid self-interest thinking we have to protect as much of our exports to the United States as possible? We can't find new markets very quickly. Therefore, we abase ourselves to this man.
Yeah, I think it was a perfectly rational attempt to limit the damage. And I think a lot of European leaders thought that is that. We've now at least got some stability so we can look forward. But Trump is a classic playground bully. The psychology isn't difficult to understand. What he took from that meeting was these people are weak. They are our vassals. They have supplicated themselves to us. And of course, that was the signal for Trump to come back again and again, because the playground bully will always come back for another punishment beating. So if you look, for example, at the pressure the Europeans have been subjected to water down tech regulation, that, I think, would never have happened if they had actually confronted Trump in Scotland and if they had said, we are the equal of the United States in respect of trade and economy, so there's no reason to do this. But they did, and that means they've now been under pressure in all kinds of other ways. Now, I think this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because they have to confront the cold reality that the United States not only is no longer an ally, it is an adversary.
But of course, the opportunity for Putin is to do something like invading a Baltic state, knowing that his pal Trump is not going to do anything about it. And therefore, Europe doesn't really have the kind of time required to build up, if you like, replacement assets to, I suppose, replace those that are currently supplied by the United States.
Well, on one level, that's true, but we shouldn't forget that already the European states collectively spend about 400 billion euros on defense and security. The Americans spend about 1 trillion per year. So it's not as if the Europeans have completely neglected security and defense. And of course, there are many, many member states of NATO in Europe that are increasing spending dramatically. Poland, for example, Germany. So that 400 billion euros is very significant. It's going to go up again year after year in the next 4 years. But the bigger challenge for Europe, absent the United States, I think, Pat, is about how you resource things centrally and how you move from the situation we have now, where there is lots of duplication, the production of military hardware and so on. How do you move to a more centralized model? I think it's either via a coalition of the willing on the one hand, and secondly, with the European Union, through the European Commission, coordinating lots of different forms of procurement of weapons system and so forth. So a lot of that is happening, but I think the political level now, I think, realizes that whether it's a European component of NATO or whether it's a wholly European security forces, Europe is on its own. And for the first time since 1949, it has to think about defending the continent from predators like Putin without American help.
Now, the Americans spend $1 trillion, Europe spends 400 billion. So there is a disparity there. But then America has other concerns. They've got concerns in Asia Pacific. They've got to keep an eye on China. They've got to keep, military assets in those countries, in places like South Korea, in Japan. They have assets all over the place. They are deeply involved in the Middle East. They're not going to put boots on the ground, but they're putting everything else on the ground. And of course, then there's the Caribbean adventure that looks like it's going to put boots on the ground in that country, in Venezuela.
That's right. And actually, one of the virtues of the new security strategy is that it's relatively short, about 30-something pages, and it's written in very clear, kind of legible language. So I think you're absolutely right. The United States has a kind of global geopolitical map that it's engaged with. Whatever the priorities of a particular administration are, for Europe, it's very different. And the priority is defending the continent against an arch predator. And I think we have to be very clear about who Putin is and what he is. And I think this is one of the great mistakes made in Europe over the last 20 years, that they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Putin is an arch opportunist. So when people say there's no way, given that level of European defense spending and rearmament, that he would even attempt to invade one of the Baltic states, well, the same people were saying exactly the same thing about Ukraine in January 2022. Putin, like Hitler, is an opportunist in every sense. And when he senses weakness in his opponents, that's when he strikes. Yeah. So I think that's part of the rationale for the kind of whole-scale change that is going on in Europe currently.
Yeah, but I suppose Trump looks over at Putin in Russia and Xi in China, and he sees these guys are in charge for life, basically, unless they blot their copybooks and cause humiliation to their countries, in which case they will be removed. And Trump, of course, has only 3 years left in which to leave his mark. He may hope that there's some sort of succession, be it Vance or Rubio, or even, heaven protect us, from one of his own children. So, time is running out for Trump.
Well, in every kind of rational frame of thinking, you would say that is the case. But this is a guy who tried to mount a coup d'etat in January of 2021. I don't think we should assume for a moment that Trump is actually going to leave office in 2028. He keeps dropping hints about some kind of new mechanism that they could deliver him a third presidency. So, given the extraordinary things that he has done domestically in the United States, some of them almost unimaginable, even after the first term, I don't think we should assume anything about what might happen in the next presidential election. And I think it's worth saying, Pat, that if we do the comparison with Germany in 1933, the kind of moves that Trump has made in the United States are much more bold and radical than the Nazis did in their first year. For example, they didn't enact the Nuremberg laws until at least 1935 or 36. There was no significant foreign policy move until Hitler moved his troops into the Rhineland in 1935. And if you compare this to all of the assaults that Trump has made on U.S. institutions and agencies, think about what ICE has been doing on the streets of American cities. It is just as bold and radical. So we shouldn't assume that 2 years from now, the United States will have an electoral process that compares to any in the past.
We've all seen the movies where the Gestapo move in and they lift Jewish people off the streets. I mean, the comparison is there. It's vivid and it's seen on our televisions. And Americans maybe have gone beyond shock. That's the problem, that a lot of this stuff is being normalized, and maybe that's the way it was in Nazi Germany. I'm not one of them, therefore I won't be lifted, but I am one of them, maybe I will be lifted. So you live in fear. Finally, I should ask you about his racism, his bigotry, because it's raw now, and the idea of a man with a Scottish and German heritage, despising people of brown or black skin and wanting immigration from the Nordic countries, ideally. And one of the things I read yesterday, the national parks, they have so many days of the year where admission to everybody is free. One of those days was Martin Luther King Day. That's gone now. You can't get in free on Martin Luther King Day, but there's another day you can get in free, Trump's birthday. I mean, that's where we're at. Imagine.
It is, and I think that speaks to the kind of cult of Trump that he has so encouraged in recent years. But on the racism, go back to the comments about Somalis within recent weeks, referring to them as garbage and suggesting that even those Somalis who were citizens of the United States, that they could be thrown out of the country. I mean, that's extraordinary. But why are people surprised? This is a guy who, during his first campaign in 2016, was mocking disabled people openly. So why are we surprised that now the normalization of racism has become almost banal? The great Hannah Arendt referred to the banality of evil when analyzing the Nazis. I think we can make that kind of comparison very easily. And it does suggest that the trajectory that the United States has still got some way to go in 2026. And it could get a lot worse than it's been, even over these dramatic 9 or 10 months.
But the straws in the wind are, of course, that the Democrats are winning in places in small elections where they were not predicted to win. So there is maybe a natural sense of how reprehensible this individual is. One final point I want to ask you about before I let you go, John, and that is about what Putin has signalled now in the wake of the taking of the oil tanker, the Venezuelan oil tanker, by America, the seizing of, it looks like an illegal act, but anyway, that is still, I think, a debatable point. Putin has now pledged support for Maduro. So where's that going to leave the love affair between the Donald and Vladimir?
Well, I think their relationship is one that is strange, to say the least. We know that there's virtually nothing that Trump has done during this first year in office that has really challenged Putin's prerogatives or his interests. From time to time, you get this kind of sketchiness. But in terms of just material action by the United States has been virtually nothing. Now, Putin has this whole series of client states around the world, some of them holdovers from the Cold War. The assertiveness with which the Americans have been engaging with Venezuela may have surprised some, but I think it's completely consistent with the national security strategy, which the Russians have actually praised because it envisages three great powers, the United States, Russia and China, and that they have absolute impunity within their spheres of interest. So for the United States, it's this recreation of the Monroe Doctrine, and I think that's why you're seeing what's happening in Venezuela. But, Putin, I think, is playing on a much larger canvas, and Venezuela will be sacrificed in a heartbeat if he thinks that that will help him with the much, much more important questions that the United States has been allying with him on.